Of this, the Joint Select Committee on National Security to order. We propose to deal with continuation of our inquiry, this committee's inquiry, into the operations of the Forensic Science Center and the issue of DNA sampling in Trinidad and Tobago. Might I indicate that the proceedings are being recorded and will be aired on the Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel ParlView. May I take this opportunity to sincerely welcome the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, the Acting Chief Personnel Officer, the Acting Commissioner of Police, and of course the Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center, and all of the officials who would have accompanied you to support your positions here this afternoon. And I would like to invite you to introduce yourselves, beginning, of course, with the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security.
Thank you.
Vel Lewis, Permanent Secretary, the Ministry of National Security.
Stephen Williams, Acting Commissioner of Police.
Special welcome to you, sir. You've been a regular visitor to this hallowed place within recent times. A very special welcome, yeah?
Thank you.
Ian McIntyre, Chief Parliamentary Counsel.
Thank you. Of Senior Counsel. Yes, sir.
Arlette Lewis, Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center.
Thank you very much. I am Fitzgerald Ethelbert Hines, Chairman of this committee, Member of Parliament. And let me ask my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Senator Michael Coppin, a member.
Nicole Olivier, member. Senator Torrell Shriki-Soon, member.
We are usually with a couple other members, some of whom are obviously not with us today. Mr. Prakash Ramadan, Member of Parliament, he couldn't be with us. And Senator Wayne Sturge, who is somewhere in the precincts conducting other public business. And of course, yes, my colleague, the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West, and the Attorney General, Mr. Faris Al-Rawi. Thank you all very much again. Let us remind you that the objective of this hearing is to gain elucidation on the challenges that you encounter in relation to DNA sampling and the establishment of the Forensic DNA Data Bank pursuant to the law that governs those. That is to say, the Deoxyribonucleic Acid Act administration of justice, Deoxyribonucleic Act of 2012. We are not unaware as a committee that you have encountered and perhaps continue to encounter certain challenges. And part of our responsibility is to understand what they are so that we can communicate them to our principals, as it were, because we are a subset of the Parliament, to communicate it in our report to the Parliament, and of course, where necessary, as often is the case, to the Minister of National Security in this particular case, who is responsible in constitutional and legal terms for the operation. I would like to acknowledge the fact that in response to our written requests, we received written submissions from the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security, by letters dated June the 8th and June the 20th, 2016. We thank you for that. I therefore would like to ask the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security, to express briefly any opening thoughts or comments that you may have now that we have indicated clearly what our purpose this afternoon is, and your comments will be followed by those of the Acting Commissioner of Police and, of course, the Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center in turn. Thank you very much.
In terms of our last meeting, where you had indicated that there were challenges, and I'm pleased to say that some of the challenges have been overcome. And to ensure we keep on track, we put in place a steering committee under the stewardship of the Deputy Permanent Secretary responsible for Defense and Protective Services to ensure that everything remains on track. I think that's what I want to say at this point then, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very kindly. So some advance has been had.
Yes, sir.
And this steering committee is at work.
As of Friday next week, they will begin to work, sir.
I see. Thank you. Mr. Commissioner.
Honorable Chairman, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is represented here on invitation to provide any assistance that the committee requires. I do in fact have two officers available. One who is the First Division Officer in charge of the Scientific Evidence Unit, which we normally refer to as CIRU. That's ASP Dilion. So matters relevant to the operations of the police service and the issue of evidence recovery will effectively be supported by him.
Thank you very much. Madame Lewis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Further to what the Permanent Secretary has said, we have, in fact, as a team, responded to the questions that were asked in terms of the challenges. In terms of the specific challenges for the establishment of the DNA data bank, I don't know if you wanted us to, deal with that or into all the particular questions you asked.
Well, we had asked for some opening remarks, but if you are in flight,
all right. In terms of the DNA data bank, work has started and is continuing, and I think what is happening now is that everyone is on board what needs to be done, and that is going ahead. We have really several challenges related to the work that is needed to be done done by the center. A lot of it is related to the quantity of work that is coming to us over which we have no control, but we are working as best as we can with what we have, And a lot of the issues surround, and it goes back to what is coming to us that we can't say we can't work on. We just are taking longer because we do not have the capacity in some of the areas to deal with the requirements or the demands that are asked of us on a daily basis. But we are working as best as we can with what the staff we have, the equipment we have. But again, that is just a overall picture of what is going on.
Well, obviously, as I indicated earlier, our business is to understand very, very clearly what those challenges, including your manpower challenges, are, so that we can make recommendations to the Parliament or to your minister and support the effort to getting those challenges resolved so that the full effect of the law can be brought to bear, especially in the circumstances as now exists in Trinidad and Tobago. So I would like you then, having heard those opening statements, to tell us a bit about those challenges, in particular as it relates to manpower. I recall on the last occasion we were here, one office holder or one office that is yet to be established, filled, is that of the custodian. For the benefit of those who are observing, listening, tell us, who is the custodian? What is his or her responsibility in this law? And why, in your view, a custodian has not yet been appointed? Because that clearly is one of your challenges. And thereafter, you could tell us about the general human resource issues that you indicated that you face, so that we can better understand.
The custodian, under Part 3 of the Act, the custodian is supposed to be responsible for what we call the National Forensic DNA Data Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. And that office or that entity, because it's going to be an entity which is separate and apart from the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center, will be responsible for the storing of all the data, all the DNA profiles that are generated either at the center or that Trinidad and Tobago would come into the possession of Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, from immigration purposes, from deportees, or by mutual understanding. They will be the persons who would be responsible for storing the profiles and having it on a database. If the Commissioner of Police, for instance, has some information where he or she would like to find out if a particular individual in a case could have been responsible for a case that happened some time ago, right? The Forensic Science Center would in fact submit all their profiles to the data bank, but it would be the function of the custodian to search the data bank, right, to determine whether cases are linked also, right? If we get cases or profiles rather from other sources, other laboratories, other countries, or if the requests for other countries asking for information about DNA profile to search against our data bank, that would be the function of the office of the custodian, right? The custodian is, if you want to call, the person who heads the unit, which would be called the National Forensic DNA Data Bank. As it stands now, what happens is there's a particular case where, let's say it's a wounding case or sexual offenses case, the investigator would in fact take some samples and ask us to do a DNA analysis to determine if this particular suspect is responsible for this particular crime. And so it's all dealt with on a case-by-case basis now. But what would happen in the future is we get a suspect, 5 years down the road, we have some crime scene samples where DNA profiles were generated 5 years ago, he would then be able to ask the custodian, the investigator, or through the Commissioner of Police, based on the regulations or the law, if they can do a search and determine if this person would have been responsible for any, if you want to call, cold cases or any cases that have not been solved. So it's important for us as a country to have the custodian in place so that that could be done, similar to what is done in fingerprints, where you can do tracing and determine if this person did something how many ever years ago.
Let me ask a couple of questions before, of course, my colleagues do the same. On the last occasion, one of your officers indicated to this committee that you are not, you, the Forensic Science Center, you, generally speaking, do not collect evidence on the crime scenes. That is a matter for the Commissioner of Police and his men and women.
Yes.
And we established that that is not unique. It is not strange. It is not a bugbear. It's not a problem. That's pretty okay. In some places, jurisdictions, the Forensic Science Center might very well be the entity that does that collection from the crime scene. But either way, it's not an issue. It is how it is managed and so on. So you have the police collecting, dealing with the crime scene.
Yes.
You have the Forensic Science Center, which does the analysis of whatever the police would have picked up by way of evidence on the crime scene. And then you have the DNA data bank headed by the custodian that stores these profiles over time.
That's correct.
That's how the thing is designed to work. I would like you to just, and there's obviously, as you said, some independence of office, the custodian and the DNA data bank, from the Forensic Science Center, which does analysis and testing and so on. Why, in your view, for our benefit, is this distinction to exist, this independence from the Forensic Science Center? Just for elucidation. In other words, the layman's question, why can't you, having analyzed it, retain the information, just as the custodian, independent of you, might have? Because
generally, the database, generally, I'm talking about internationally, the databases, the data banks rather, are normally independent. It's normally done by an independent body because, for instance, in the States, all the laboratories in the States, their data bank is managed by the FBI, even the state labs and so on, so that if there's any, if you want to say checking and so on to be done, is one collection point, right? In the Canada, the RCMP, there's a separate entity within the RCMP. The individual labs don't do it. There is one particular, if you want to say, office. So I think it was done by, and I have to say by the, it was drafted in such a way based on best international practice, where it is normally an independent body to the labs. So you don't have your persons who are generating the profiles being responsible for keeping the profiles. They transfer it to an independent body whose function is to keep that and manage it, because it takes, it's not really, the analyst it will have to be, even if it's within the center, it will have to be a completely separate unit managed by a different set of personnel. But I think internationally that's how it's done. It's normally an independent unit, independent from the labs, and all the labs will send it to this particular.
Let me ask again, under the Act, quite apart from the police and the collection of evidence on crime scenes, under the Act, provision is made for collection of samples from different subsets of the society. Is that correct? Like prisoners, some categories of prisoners.
Yes. Yes.
Suspects, correct?
Yes.
Persons detained and so on. So quite apart from collection by the police on the crime scene, the law permits, I think in which section, Mr. McIntyre might be able to direct us promptly. I think is it section 15. For example, section 15. Let me just read that. Section 15 of the Act provides that a non-intimate sample shall be taken from the following persons without his consent, and that the Commissioner of Police shall make arrangements for these samples to be taken by a qualified person. And it goes on to list a person who is employed or applies for employment as an officer of the protective services, which we now know means police, defense force, and fire service. A member of the municipal police, a member of the special police, any employee, any person employed so or applying for employment, a constable within the meaning of the Supplemental Police Act, or a member of the Defense Force, customs officer of the Customs and Excise Division, and a private security officer. So we see, and then the prisoners, as I told you. So the law permits that you can obtain these samples from these categories. That is the responsibility of the Forensic Science Center, is it, on instructions to the police commissioner? Or the police commissioner can just proceed to do that? Mr. McIntyre, you have the act before you, I take it. I was looking at section 15.
Section 15.
Yes. I was getting to the point. Yes.
But who will be taken by a qualified person?
Yes, but whose responsibility it is, from your reading of that piece of law, to collect these samples? We know on a crime scene that's the matter for the police, detainees and so on. The police will deal with that.
Yeah.
And we talk here about the Commissioner of Police.
Okay, so the person who is authorized to order the taking of the non-intimate sample is listed in the 4th schedule.
Yes.
As the Commissioner of Police in respect of the police service, Special Reserve Police, and Supplemental Police. The Chief Fire Officer in respect of the fire service, the Commissioner of Prisons, in respect of the prison service, etc.
Right. So all these office holders are mandated under the law to simply take these samples from these categories of persons.
Yes.
And then make those samples available to the custodian,
to the custodian, to be kept in the data bank.
So that it is in that way and in other ways that this data bank is developed, so that at the appropriate times you can have matches with this expanded or expanding data bank. Am I correct?
That's the intention, yes.
All right, great. Colleagues, you may have some matters you wish to raise. Thank you. Section 13, while my colleagues, you have some... Yeah, please, go ahead, Senator Shriki.
Thank you, Chair. Can anyone advise if, though this act has been in effect since 2012, can anyone advise if any of the samples or any of the analyses that has been done prior to now, has that been stored, and is it stored anywhere that can be accessed at any point in time? Thank you.
The samples that were submitted to the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center for analysis, or the profiles that were that have been generated to date, are at the center, and as soon as the if you want to call it the custodian, the office of the custodian is set up and generated, established, we are in a position, based on whatever infrastructural arrangements, put in networking to be able to send them to the, so we have samples that were submitted to us that we have actually generated profiles. We have them available for transfer to the data bank as soon as it is generated.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that question, you mentioned earlier that your analyses are being done on a case-by-case basis. But should you have a sample, do you have the capability to actually, once you determine or once you analyze a sample, do you have the capability to run a check against the data that you have collected or that has been stored to help assist in any way?
We will check it against what is done in the particular case, right? That's how it will be done, a collection of, if you want to say items in a case, so we check it against that. However, oftentimes, based on information a police investigation will have, they will ask us to check it against a previously submitted case or previously submitted evidence, and we'll then have to physically do it. We can't do it electronically now.
Okay, so that was the point I was trying to get at, whether or not you have the capability to essentially perform a cross-reference or check based on what you have.
Manually now, we can do it.
But that has to be initiated by someone.
Yes, it has to be requested, and it will also be requested in the provisions of the data bank also allow for that to be done. But then it could be done electronically. So now it's, now it's.
But do you have the capability to do it electronically at this time?
No.
Yes. So therefore, what you're saying to me is that sometimes you may actually have a sample that probably could have a match that's in a database somewhere, that if it's not initiated by a request, that match may not occur.
Yes, the possibility occurs now.
Thank you.
Quest, isn't it, Commissioner?
Yes, Chairman.
So it depends on the depth and the extent of the investigation and so on. Madam Oliveri, you had some.
If I may just follow up on the question in terms of the storage of the samples that you currently maintain until the data bank becomes available. What is your capacity to store evidence, and how much time again would it take before you have exhausted that capacity? I'm trying to get a sense of exactly how urgent it is.
Okay, what we do is we actually store the profile. Okay, it's not the actual sample that we are storing to give to the custodian. It's okay. This sample. Okay, the sample is the actual physical sample of bit of blood, or it could be saliva that would have been taken from the suspect or the crime scene or the item of evidence, right? A knife or so. Those, what would happen is we would extract the DNA from that and we would generate a profile, right? The actual items from a crime scene is given back to the police because quite often it is used as an exhibit in court. So we don't store those. What we store are what we have available, which is what we're going to be given to the custodian, is the actual profile, which is like your fingerprint. So that is stored digitally. It's written on the report, okay? But that information is what we will then be giving to the custodian. We are also required to store samples taken from I think for a period of 10 years. I can't remember the exact. I guess Mr. McIntyre. And where they talk about storing of the samples, that is in case, and that is for the case, the samples where we take from suspects or that is right. 25(1). That is where we're talking about subject to those where a sample is not destroyed during forensic DNA analysis. The center shall keep the sample for a minimum of period of 5 years. What we would keep is the actual extract of the sample. So there's a difference between the sample, which we fizz, and in those cases, what we do is if it's a blood sample, we use little cards where we'll extract it and keep it under certain conditions for a period of 5 years, after which we are able to destroy it, as opposed to the profile, which goes to the data bank. So I hope it's clear, the difference between the profile and the sample.
For the benefit of those who are ignorant of your science, it is describe it. Because the question posited an understanding, if you like, a craving for an understanding. How many of these could you store? You need a big, big room, a small room. So tell us, this profile.
The profile is really a code, which is written on a report, which is generated by an instrument, which can be stored electronically. So it is not, it's okay, it's like your fingerprint, right? The sample is something that is physical. The profile is a result of your genetic code. So it is not, it is written on your reports, the reports that are given to the police officers. We store our reports, so it will be in every report. It is also can be stored in a if you want to say digitally in a database. So the storing of the profile does not actually take up space.
Comes as we have been promised, and the custodian is appointed, and the DNA, the data bank is established. You are in a position to transfer these profiles to the custodian for permanent keeping, so that nothing is now being lost.
No, sir.
Go ahead, Senator.
I don't know, question may well be better directed to the senior counsel, Mr. McIntyre. Based on my reading of the Act, it appears, the Act is clear that the custodian shall have the sole custody and control of forensic DNA in the data bank. This is Section 10. So I don't know, I understand the intimate sample and samples can be taken, but as it relates to storage, it would appear that any storage currently must be legal. I don't know if that is your interpretation as well of this legislation collectively.
It's not, I don't think it's illegal. What you have would be the profiles generated by the forensic analysts, and they are keeping that as a matter of their records. At present, they don't have anywhere to put it. They can't forward it to the bank. So once the data bank is established, then they would be able to forward what they have collected by way of analysis, and what they have now by way of their records, they would be able to forward it to the data bank. So the information that they have now is not illegal.
So that is governed by what exactly? What piece of legislation governs, because that would be personal information, surely. So is it that the Data Protection Act, which is not in effect, or some sections are in effect, but what governs the storage currently of personal information as it relates to data, given the fact that the data custodian is not appointed, but what governs the actual storage of data, DNA?
Okay, Section 25 is what is governing it right now. where sample is not destroyed during forensic DNA analysis, the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center shall keep the sample for a minimum of 5 years. So that is the authority there for the center to keep the information.
Effectively, the Forensic Science Center is now acting as the custodian. Effectively. That's it?
I won't go so far. I think that
Well,
the two roles are
I know,
clearly delineated.
But right now, these profiles are being kept by the Forensic Science Center when we know it should have been kept elsewhere. But the bank has not been established, the custodian has not been appointed. So effectively, for the time being, the Forensic Science Center is retaining these profiles, acting as the Madam Forensic Science Center Director. This is for you. So you are effectively acting as the custodian as we speak. Yea or nay?
Yeah, in terms of all the profiles that we generate.
Great.
And we will have to keep them even when the custodian is
I
no
must
longer
therefore
away.
ask, is that perhaps the reason why we have not yet appointed a custodian since 2012? Let me identify the presence of the Chief Personnel Officer and the representatives of that organization present. I did not on first take cause you the opportunity to introduce yourselves. Let me do so now with an apology for my oversight earlier. Please, CPO.
Good afternoon, Beresford Riley, Chief Personnel Officer, Acton.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Gary Joseph, Acting Deputy Chief Personnel Officer.
Good afternoon, Susan Rajnath Hulier, Acting Director, Benefits Management Division.
Good afternoon, Dawn De Silva, Senior Human Resource Officer.
And there are some other persons sitting in the back as well. Would you take the opportunity to introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon, Kazim Ali. I'm Legal Officer with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service.
Good afternoon, Jerry Dillian. I'm an Acting Assistant Superintendent at the Homicide Bureau of Investigations.
Good afternoon, Maria Joseph, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security.
Good afternoon, Mark Lutchman, Project Manager with the Ministry of National Security.
Thank you very much. Madam Director of Forensic Science Center, are you in a position to tell us why to date a custodian has not been appointed and why a DNA bank, in accordance with the legislation, has not been established? Are you in a position to tell us that?
No, sir.
Not?
I'm not in a position to say why it hasn't been done. I'm in a position to say what has been done towards the establishment, because the process started since I think sometime in about either 13 or 14, and there were several steps involved. And the first thing that I know has been completing was actually doing what you call the org chart for the organization, because it's not only the custodian and the deputy custodian, or the, I can't remember the name of the other term, but there are an org chart was done. That org chart has in fact been approved, right? The Act had called for us to, before it was for us to have, if you want to say, under 9, without prejudice to the power of the public service, it allowed us to engage a person on contract under subsection 1, in accordance with guidelines, to help us to establish it, because we didn't really have anybody, we didn't have the position. And what has happened is we actually had sometime in 2015, if I remember clearly, The positions were advertised for the 2 key positions to assist with the establishment, and interviews and so were held. Some work was also done, sir, in terms of identifying the software, if you call it that, the program to be used, but a lot of that will have to be falls under the custodian and the deputy custodian. So some work has been done in terms of getting it started. That much I can see. And I guess.
Okay, thank you.
It's not that nothing was done, but the first set of steps have been taken in terms of having.
Let me bring the CPO in on this. A lot was said about the office of the CPO when we identified this grave deficiency on the last occasion we met here. Is the office of the CPO in a position to tell us anything further on the failure to have established the office of custodian and deputy custodian to date?
What I can say, Mr. Chairman, is that a request was made for the position of custodian and deputy custodian for terms to be provided for them by the personnel department, as is customary when a position is on contract. With respect to the finalization of those terms, regrettably, that matter took longer than expected in terms of the finalization. We have since the committee last met, and it has been brought to the attention of the personnel department. We have subsequently finalized those terms and conditions, and the relevant authority within the Ministry of National Security is in a position to make an offer to persons who have been identified as potential incumbents on those positions.
Bearing in mind that everything you say here is recorded, I would like to ask, when did that request come to you? And, well, I already know when it was advanced. You told us within recent times, since you were last here, within the last 2 weeks or so. But when did that request come to you? I want to get a sense of how long it took at the office of the CPO in light of your suggestion of regret. How long did you bear this burden?
The request came in May 2015.
Yes. And you acted on it finally, with finality, in the month of June of 2016.
We acted on it when it came. We finalized it in June of 2016.
So altogether, you bore that burden for 1 year.
If it can be considered a burden, the answer is yes.
I would suggest that it must only be that. A year. Okay. But at least now we know that the terms and conditions have been resolved.
That is correct.
And efforts are being made to get bodies to fill the positions as we speak.
I can't speak to that, Mr. Chairman, but I would assume the answer is yes also.
Madam Forensic? Oh, PS, sorry. Oh, yes, the Permanent Secretary. Are you able to speak to that?
Yes, sir. These terms and conditions were handed to me about an hour ago, and I assure you that as of tomorrow, the parties interviewed will be contacted as to whether they're still available for the post.
An hour ago?
Well,
the burden.
I don't see that the burden is a responsibility.
I see. Yes. Madam Oliver.
If we may just shift the line of questioning into the actual operations of the Forensic Science Center. I certainly want to thank you for presenting the detailed breakdown of the completion of cases for the various sections. So now we certainly have a clearer understanding of which areas you are strong in and which areas tend to be weak. I know that in the biology section, well, certainly in the chemistry section and the document and the toxicology sections, your performance is quite efficient. The vast majority of those cases are completed. Know that in the firearm section in particular, the rate of completion of cases has not crossed 10% in any year over the past 5 years. And overall, I noticed that the performance in 2016 has been significantly lower than in the previous years. You would have also identified.
Can I just explain something? Go ahead. These are the 2016 cases that have been in fact completed, right? It's not that these would be the only cases done in 2016, because the older cases and the cases that the representatives of the TTPS would have asked us for in 2016, older cases would also have been done. So this is really a percentage of the 2016 submissions that we would have done, and those would probably would have been done because they would have been considered priority and we would have been asked to work on them. So it's not that that's all the only 3 cases were done for the year.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Now, in looking at your recommendations for how you can improve the efficiency and deal with the backlog of cases, well, particularly in the biology section, you indicate that the employment of at least 3 additional qualified DNA analysts would help you to improve your performance in that area. So I have a number of questions there because, well, I know that in 2014 you would have extended your staff from 4 to 6 analysts. However, the actual performance in 2015 would have dropped significantly, although you had additional staff members. So I find that a bit curious. But I'm wondering, the existing staff working in the biology section, are they in fact qualified DNA analysts that you have currently in existence, or is it that you now need to have specialist DNA analysts working in the biology section to enable you to work with that backlog?
Okay, I just want to clarify. What we were asked were the percentage of cases completed, the cases that were received in that year that were completed. This is not the number of cases that were done in the year, right? This is the number of cases from 2011, based on the question that was asked, the number of cases from 2011 that have already been completed. This is not the number of cases that were done in 2011. Similarly, for 12, 13, 14, 15, and from January to April 2016. So this is not really a reflection of the number of cases done in the year, but the number of cases from the submissions from that particular year that have been completed to date. So I need to, you know, if you see the question asked about the percentage of cases completed or otherwise resolved, that the submissions from that particular year. So it doesn't mean only 323 of the 2015 cases were resolved. But what would have happened is some of the cases that were worked on in 2015 would have been older. Sorry, I'm looking at biology. Some of the cases, some of the 607 from 2014, 589 from 2013, 561 from 2012, some of those cases would have in fact been done in 2015 and or in 2016. Because as I'm saying, we don't, we work on the cases based on what is asked for us by the TTPS. They would submit many cases, but they would ask us to give priority. So we tend to work on the priority cases. So sometimes in 2015, they might have had a case from 2014 where we didn't have all the samples, we didn't have enough information, and so it would have been worked on in 2015 or 2016.
Okay, so essentially, I think the information that would be really helpful to us would be really an indication of what is your rate of work. So
you want to know how many cases we did in each year?
Yes, I mean, it doesn't matter specifically which year it came from, but we're trying to get a sense of how much work is done at any given
each year. Okay.
And
Well, that's-
particularly, so if the TTPS doesn't flag a particular case as priority, is it likely to be completed?
Yes, it will be completed, but the other ones will be given priority.
So this is why we need that overall.
So you want an overall picture of the number of cases, okay.
Number of cases that are
Worked on or completed in a particular year. And you would see that in 2016, for most of the, for the biology section, I'm sure, and the chemistry section, the numbers in 2015 would have increased because they had increased staff. In terms of your second question, which had to deal with the DNA analysts, yes, they're all qualified DNA analysts who would have had, would have done postgraduate training in that particular discipline. And in terms of, some of them actually have as much as probably 8 to 9 years experience. And the more recent ones, we had asked for them to have at least 2 years experience in terms of following their postgraduate qualification. So everyone is in fact qualified. But why we probably asked for 2 years work experience is because in that case, the person can come and start, you know, if you just say qualified with no experience, the learning curve is a little longer. So if you want to work on the backlog, we ask for people with experience and not necessarily only a qualification.
Well, we are all familiar with the law. In Part 4 of this Administration of Justice Act, Administration of Justice Deoxyribonucleic Acid Act of 2012, Section 13(1) says, subject to subsection 2, and I'm reading it because the public probably wouldn't have easy and immediate access to it as we speak. Subject to subsection 2, a police officer or qualified person shall take a non-intimate sample from a person without his consent, where A, the person is a suspect, detainee, or accused. B, a stain derived from a crime scene exists, and there are reasonable grounds for suspecting that the person was involved in the offense and for believing that forensic DNA analysis could confirm or disprove such suspicion. C, the person has had a non-intimate sample taken, and that sample, 1, has proved to be either unsuitable or insufficient for forensic DNA analysis, 2, is lost or destroyed, or 3, cannot be used for any other reason, or D, the person is not a victim of an offense, attends a crime scene, and is required by an investigating officer to give a non-intimate sample. Now, this one is for you, Commissioner. Are the police actually carrying out the diktats of the law as I've just read them? Are the police actually taking non-intimate samples routinely as this law provides from, for example, a suspect, detainee, or accused? Is this happening?
Honorable Chairman, I would defer to ESP Dillion to give me some details on that. To the best of my knowledge, not in all cases non-intimate samples taken, but I'll just defer to ESP Dillion.
Thank you very much. And before he proceeds, let me, for the benefit of those who are listening to us, say that There are two categories of samples recognized here, intimate sample and non-intimate sample. An intimate sample means a specimen of venous blood or biological or other material taken from A, any part of a person's genitals, or B, a person's bodily orifice other than the mouth. And a non-intimate sample means a specimen of A, blood obtained by a pinprick. I recall there's this little instrument you just play with on the tip of the finger, you get a small bit of it, painless, non-intrusive. B, epithelial cells obtained by means of a buccal or mouth swab against the cheek, just to get some tissue on that swab, which can be used for DNA analysis. C, plucked hair, just a little bit, relatively painless, as if you pull out a jank from like me. D, saliva. So we now reminded of the distinction between the intimate sample and the non-intimate sample, and Mr. De Leon is now relating to us whether the police are routinely complying with the dictates of Section 13 of the Act by obtaining routinely from suspects, detainees, and such other groups as the law permits the police to take on a routine and ongoing basis. Mr. De Leon.
Good day, Honorable Chairman. From where I sit at the Homicide Bureau of Investigations, this is a routine, this practice is routinely carried out as regards to suspect, detainee, or accused person coming into the custody of officers of the Homicide Bureau of Investigation during the course of their investigations. Buccal swab, but any form of buccal swabs are taken.
Being investigated, they are at play or at work. For greater specificity, they are at work. So once detainees, suspects also come into the custody of the homicide unit, they routinely, we are now assured by Mr. De Leon, obtain these samples in accordance with the law. So I revert, Mr. Commissioner, to you, because the homicide unit is not the only unit of the police service that would detain people and have in their custody people who are suspects and so on. Are you, Mr. Commissioner, since Mr. De Leon only dealt with a subset of your service, are you able to tell us whether samples are routinely taken from all others when in your custody, other than in the homicide unit, of course?
I'm not in a position to so state at this point, Honorable Chairman. However, I can surely verify.
And look forward to that, to prevent you having to come here again, if you would indicate that to the committee in writing with promptitude. Thank you very much. And while I am at writing, Madam Forensic Science Center Director, you told us that an org chart, organizational chart, has been developed in relation to the Office of the Custodian. Would you be kind enough to make that available to the Secretariat with promptitude, please?
Honorable Chairman, that work was done by the HR unit of the former Ministry of Justice. So it will now be in the possession of the. It wasn't. I was part of the discussions, but that's not in my particular.
I see. The
possession
Ministry of Justice no longer exists.
That's what I'm saying. So the Ministry of National Security.
That portfolio is now with the Ministry of National Security. And therefore, I must direct this matter to the PS, National Security. We look forward to a copy of that org chart at your earliest, because our business is to find out, as I indicated, what are your challenges. And it would help us to clarify that. And talking about challenges, would some or any of you tell us what are the human resource challenges you face in applying the dictates of this law? What are some of the technological challenges that you face? And certainly whether there are, Mr. McIntyre, legal deficiencies. Having operated this act since 2012 to some extent, and obviously to some extent not, for emphasis, if there are legal challenges, deficiencies that you would like to indicate to us, we would be very happy to communicate them to the wider Parliament so that we could consider improving the legislation. So, I now open the floor to each or any of you to tell us what are some of these challenges. My broad categorization, HR, technological, and legal, if any.
Good day, Chairman. In the establishment of the DNA database, there are certain key elements which we need to look at to establish that unit. One of them, as we have spoken at length about already, the establishment of the custodian unit itself, which requires bringing on board the custodian, deputy custodian, and his staff to assist him, and we have discussed that matter, and we are moving ahead with that matter. In terms of the National Forensic DNA Data Bank itself, and the data bank is a software which we have to acquire. We have been in discussions with parties getting advice on that DNA data bank. We have been in discussions with so we are currently exploring the acquisition of an appropriate software that will suit our purposes in Trinidad. Well, to go into some more details, we had actually partnered with the U.S. government, who has suggested that in acquisition of the CODIS software, right, which is a software that the FBI uses for DNA analysis and for their database, right? We are also exploring other opportunities with other partners, government partners that we have, so that to get a most appropriate software, but we currently had pursued going after the CODIS software. Right?
Could I just ask? Yes. Thank you, Chair. So you're telling me that you're in the process of trying to acquire the software and probably have a best fit in terms of the software you're trying to use.
Yeah.
Since the proclamation of the Act, there is no finality on any software provider for that, or any agent that you can acquire the software from at this point in time? We still don't know?
Well, the ministry at the time was pursuing the acquisition of the CODIS software.
And would that software work for you?
Yes, it can.
So why wasn't it acquired?
At that time, there are certain requirements that the FBI has for us to be able, and the U.S. State Department, for us to acquire that software, right? One of them is to have a recipient of that software, which is the custodian unit itself. Since we have no established custodian unit, there's no recipient for the software. So acquisition of the software, of that CODIS software, is based on having that custodian unit on board and established.
So then you're saying to me, in order for us to have this working, the first thing we need is the custodian. Yes. And the only way the software could be acquired is once the custodian has been appointed.
Well, yes. So what I'm saying is that, yes, we need to have a custodian unit to be able to have a recipient of the software to be able to set up the data.
We got some progress an hour ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
The question, Chair, would be to the Permanent Secretary Accounting Officer, Mr. Yearwood, in terms of your timeline, how long do you think it would take your division to recruit and select an appropriate custodian and deputy custodian?
all things being equal, so it will take us to the end of August. But that's if everything works well, if the persons interviewed and chosen, selected, are still interested in the job.
So in roughly 2.5 months, we should have at least an offer for a custodian and deputy custodian.
We're hoping towards that, sir.
And then my follow-up question would be to Mr. Lutchman. Once that occurs, how long would it take you then to acquire the software, and do you have the resources at this time to acquire the software?
We have the resources at this time to acquire the software, and with subsequent to the custodian coming on board, we estimate a further 2 months. So we targeting around by December, thereabouts, we should have.
August to December.
November.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're saying September, October.
September, October, we should have that.
So then at the end of September, we should have custodian, deputy custodian, as well as software.
Yes.
All right. In
That
which
will be a
case?
targeting.
In which case, can we now request that you provide for this committee a bit of a work program with the timelines that we could live by in hope that this matter would get done in accordance with your offering?
Certainly.
Chair, across agencies. The timeline across agencies.
Yes, 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 yes. You know, I would like, Mr. Permanent Secretary, if you would forward to this committee all things taken into account, a work program with the timelines, and that would give an indication as to when we would no longer have to share this burden. Yes, Mr. Strickland. Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Chair. Now, once we've established the custodian and the software, my understanding is that samples that would have to be collected would have to go to forensics for analysis. Is that correct or no?
Well,
let me just say, once the data bank is established, the samples that we have, I shouldn't say the samples, the profiles that we have already entrained, we will submit to the data bank, and then on a regular basis, as we, if you want to say, as we generate profiles from samples in casework, we will then submit them.
But I should have said new samples, not the old ones.
The existing samples they can have as soon as the software and everything, and then the new samples will be done on a regular basis.
So then the question is, for the new samples to be collected through voluntary measures, as the chair has advised, that the police service and other agencies would be the arms to collect the data, to collect the samples. Is the police service, and I'm saying police service here because you might be the only security agency represented, are your officers trained to collect the samples? And my follow-up question would be to the forensics. Now that the samples or the volume of samples that are coming in for analysis would be increased, do you have the capacity to analyze that will now serve as the input into this data bank? So it's a two-part question. First, to the police service to determine the readiness of your officers to collect, and secondly, to forensics in terms of your capacity to analyze and now be a store to the data bank.
Many of our officers have been trained, and we will continue to train officers. So therefore, if things are all in train in 2016, the police service can fulfill its mandate under the law.
At a point in time, once the software becomes functional, your men, your officers, our officers are equipped and ready to collect the samples.
I would answer that many of our officers.
No, and the reason why I'm asking is that if you need training, if your officers need to be trained or any additional support that you require to get it done, here might just be the place for you to indicate such.
Well, clearly we have an obligation to be in the best position to have the organization fully equipped And in these circumstances, we will continue to train our officers so that we could be in the best position as soon as everything is in place.
In the fourth schedule, as Mr. McIntyre of Senior Counsel directed us earlier, which says that a non-intimate sample shall be taken by a qualified person from a person specified in the third schedule on the authority of the following persons, and so on. Now, he pointed out, and it's written here, that the Commissioner of Police will get a qualified person, and that qualified person will extract samples from the officers of the police service and the Special Reserve Police Service and the Supplemental Police Service. The Chief Fire Officer in respect of the Fire Service, the Commissioner of Prisons in respect of the Prison Service. Madam Forensic Science Center Director, I must ask, well, before I ask you, Mr. McIntyre, is it your interpretation of the law that these samples cannot be had because there exists no custodian and DNA bank, when we have been told by the Forensic Science Center here today that for the time being she is collecting these profiles, preserving them for handover to the custodian for stockpiling in the bank when those two come into existence? But more simply, is there any legal bar for the Commissioner of Police, the Commissioner of Prisons, the Chief Fire Officer, and all the officers mentioned in the fourth schedule from carrying out that duty now? And while you contemplate, oh, you ready? Go ahead.
I believe there is no obstacle to the carrying out of the function now. Yes.
You more time to give deeper contemplation to this and to ask you to submit to us in writing your considered interpretation of that matter, and to copy all the office holders when you so do. Because it may very well be that there is, as you suggested, no legal bar. And in light of the fact that the Forensic Science Center is holding these profiles and can safely and securely and legally hold them until the custodian and the bank comes into existence, it may very well be that we are just not doing what we're supposed to do, and not doing that for no good reason. So I'd be a very, very happy chairman on behalf of my committee if you would indicate to us in short order a considered view on that matter, Senior.
Certainly, Chairman.
And share that with your public service colleagues whose names appear or whose offices appear here in the fourth schedule. Thank you very much in advance. We look forward to that promptly.
Certainly.
There's one other matter, just 1 more second, that I would like to raise. Section 14 of the Act permits the taking of a non-intimate sample, actually section 14 sub 6, which reads, a repeat non-intimate sample shall within 24 hours of the time of personal service of the notice be taken by a qualified person from a person without his consent, where the person is admitted to a hospital to suspected, accused, or convicted of an offense, and B, the person is detained in a prison or other institution to which the Prisons Act applies, so that this law permits the taking of non-intimate samples from certain categories of prisoners just simply by virtue of the fact that they are a prisoner. And as Senator Shriku soon pointed out, there are fellows sitting down in the jail in those categories of prisoners from whom samples can lawfully be had, and if requests are made by the police, as we were told today, there will be cross-referencing by the Forensic Science Center, notwithstanding the non-existence of the DNA bank and or the custodian. Again, this committee, at least I, believe that there is no reason why this dictate of the law has not been routinely carried out. And if that be so, we need to get moving. So I would also like to find out from UPS in writing shortly. I'd like you to submit to this committee. Mr. McIntyre, as you look on section 14, who is responsible for that in respect of the prisoners? Is it I can't give myself legal advice. I rely upon you.
Well, I would like to look at it more closely, but on this surface, it appears to be the police who would be responsible with respect to prison, right?
Prisoners.
With respect to prisoners.
Prison officers. We know that's the commissioner of police. We don't prisoners.
Concerned with. I will look at it. It's not clear whether the fourth schedule applies.
No. That has to do with personnel who are employed in those agencies.
Right, yeah.
I'm talking now about categories of prisoners that the law says samples, non-intimate samples, the little prick on the finger, saliva, buccal swabs, a blotch of hair can be had to great value in fighting crime. I would like you to tell us, Mr. McIntyre, when you communicate to us on the other matter, who is responsible for that? And I would like you to direct that office holder's attention to the provision as well.
Okay, I will do that, yeah.
I thank you very kindly. Senator Coppin.
Mrs. Lewis, in light of the fact that you told this committee that you're currently acting as a de facto custodian, and by virtue of section 24(2)(b), it is the role of the custodian to keep all certificates of analysis strictly confidential and secured. There is a concern, or there have been concerns expressed in light of the fact that in 2014 there were 40 firearms stolen from the Forensic Sciences Complex. Could you update the committee on the status of that investigation? And that's the first question. And secondly, have security measures been implemented to ensure that there is no repeat of such an incident? And whether or not the profiles are currently safe and secure in the arms of your good self.
The status of the investigation, most I can tell you is ongoing. I am not aware that it is, I have to say it's ongoing because from time to time we get requests for information pertaining to the matter from the TTPS, and it's I don't want to put it back in the hands of the commissioner, but I'm aware it's ongoing. That's the status. In terms of, you hear me? Yeah. In terms of security measures, yes, we have taken security measures, which included the, we now have a electronic access system to the laboratory areas, which includes biometrics, time recorded biometric system, so only authorized persons have access, and only for particular times, to all the areas within the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center. That was the main security. We increased the camera system. We were able to get some assistance from the TTPS as well in terms of the actual 24-hour security arrangements which were in place, but we beefed it up a bit. But the main thing is the electronic access system, which is now there.
The question is better directed to the Commissioner of Police. Perhaps you can inform us on the status of that investigation.
The director of the Forensic Science Center is correct. The investigation is ongoing. It hasn't been completed yet. I'm not in a position to give you
Madam
that date
Director,
at this point.
give us a general, I mean, when did this take place? In what year?
It was reported in 2014.
It was detected
Well, yes.
and reported in 2014.
Yes.
Which
August.
month? August.
I think it was either July or August. Either July or August.
And that was 40 firearms.
I think it was 41 actually. I
Okay,
can't
just
remember
about.
offhand, yeah.
Just about.
It was 41.
So, Mr. Commissioner, the investigation is ongoing as we approach August of 2016.
Yes, Honorable Chairman.
Is there any hope in sight? Is there any light at the end of this long, dark tunnel?
Well, I surely can find out about the extent of the hope and light. As you would well know, I came here to address DNA. I did not come prepared for all the investigation that we are conducting. So surely I'm not in a position to so share it with you.
We do appreciate that. It just came up from the lips of the senator because we were talking about the challenges that we face. And obviously security was a challenge. So it was in that context the senator raised it, and we have been assured that measures have been put in place to improve security, and therefore that challenge perhaps doesn't exist. That's probably why I didn't list it among the 3 areas that I identified. I was asking about HR challenges, technological challenges, and legal challenges. I didn't raise the security question, maybe because I understood that you would have corrected it. So let us focus on this again. HR challenges, technological challenges, Madam Director. Legal challenges, Mr. McIntyre, Mr. PS, Mr. Commissioner of Police. Or is all hunky-dory and going well?
Honorable Chairman, well, I would have, in fact, as it relates to the DNA analysis, would have outlined in the document that we do have a backlog of cases awaiting DNA analysis. And also, in terms of clearing the backlog, one of the things would be we have some positions which are at present vacant, having those filled, and in addition, employing additional persons. But coming with employing additional persons, our main constraint is that we're going to have to get more equipment, right? Because, you know, we have more people, we need more equipment, and we also have an issue with accommodation. So if you look at it, that is, we are out of accommodation at the center. So it's all well and good saying get more persons, but
that you are fully aware of the constraints, HR space that the director has just spoken of. Are you familiar with all of them?
I won't say all, sir. I would say I'm familiar with most of them, and they would be addressed.
Well, you first have to be familiar with all. So, Madam Forensic Director, can this committee be assured that all of your challenges will be made known to the permanent secretary who heads the ministry under which your operation sits? All of your challenges will be made known to the permanent secretary very swiftly, please.
yes, sir.
And then he will make them known to us. When can we expect that, Mr. Permanent Secretary? You can have a quiet word with the director. We want to know what your challenges are.
And Chairman, I'm advised that the challenges should be brought to my attention within 2 weeks' time. And depending on what they are, I can already project when they'll be solved, when and how they'll be solved.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, as well. As you know, the legislative drafting department would not have been involved in the implementation of the legislation, so we're not really aware of the legal challenges. So there would need to be a review of the legislation in conjunction with the Forensic Center and the Ministry of National Security to really identify what the legal challenges are.
In abstract, what typically happens is that the practitioners under the law, if they discover deficiencies, they will feed them up and it eventually gets to you. We had that with the dishonored checks, with the what was the name of the act when checks are dishonored? Mr. McIntyre, remind me, please. Yes, with bounce checks and so on. What's the name of the legislation, Mr. Commissioner? It's Dishonored Checks Act, yes. We had that. The police had started to operate it and lock up people, and they discovered a serious deficiency. It was the police who got back to us and said, we have a problem here, this is deficient. And we came to Parliament and we adjusted it. That's how it works. Your job is just to put it in legalese. But this can only happen if somebody complains to you that there's a deficiency. So that is really, truthfully speaking, a matter for the director and a matter for the Commissioner of Police. If they, in operating the act, detect deficiencies, then they feed them through and it gets to you to make those, which is your specialty. So, yes. Yes, Mr. Shriki soon.
Thank you, Chair. And in keeping with the resources question of the distinguished chairman, to you, Ms. Lewis, I asked earlier and we didn't get around to answering the question, right? And especially with the thrust of the chairman in trying to encourage the officers to collect samples, do you have the capacity to analyze these samples on a timely basis as received? That's my first question to you. And in in keeping with the honorable chairman's second question of trying to determine the resources that you require, I just want to remind you that although you were not here on the last day that your officers or beneath you represented you, they did mention to us that there were productivity issues and efficiency issues that could be improved at your organization. So I would not want you to just highlight the resources that you require, but how you can improve efficiency and productivity with the existing resources that you have, and not just attribute these challenges to a lack of resources. So could you just answer and just be guided by the second comment?
Right. Thank you, sir. In terms of being able to analyze, right, timely analysis of all the samples listed, no, in our current configuration, we cannot, right? And when the bill or the act was being drafted, one of the, a provision was put in place, I think it's what, 6.2, right? Yeah, 6.2, right, forensic DNA laboratory 6 A and B, where for the government made for the purposes of obtaining forensic DNA services. And that was done primarily for us to be able to do these samples, which are considered samples, what we call reference samples, from approved labs approved by the minister by notification, because generally those samples, there are many labs that do it as that collect outsourced samples, and they really do in batches. They have the robotics, and they generally do just what we call reference samples, which is what these samples coming from the detainees or the persons who are listed in the schedule, like the police officers and so on. They are considered what we call reference samples that may not necessarily be related to a case, but you want to have on the database for future, matching and so on in case anything comes up. So that is why that provision was put in place, so that some of those samples that are not actually related to our actual criminal matter could be outsourced on a very, large volumes. It could be outsourced.
This is very timely that you're saying this to us in terms of some of the analysis being outsourced. Would you have a list of accredited agencies or institutions that you would use for this analysis?
At the moment, no.
No, the reason why I'm asking this question is that if you're outsourcing, it should be coming from reputable organizations. Now, have you outsourced before?
At the center, no, we don't have any outsourcing arrangements. So we normally, anything that comes to us, we in fact analyze ourselves.
So therefore, if it is that you would now require assistance external to your organization, it would be important for you to identify reputable organizations that are accredited to do your analysis. Now, my concern here is coming out of our Senate meeting last night. We had a situation where a lab was being utilized in a piece of legislation out of Shogunas, and that's all I'm going to say about it, as a lab for DNA testing with respect to the family court. And it turned out last night that this agent or this company that was being used had two directors, one of a DNA lab, one being an accountant and the other being an electrician. So that we don't want a situation like this, especially with the volume of samples that would be coming in, that you now choose an institution that is not accredited, and in want of a better expression, and I want to be very careful in what I say, that the institution is accredited locally or has foreign accreditation. Yes, international accreditation, and not just a company that is being used to send the samples to that will now source it externally and return the results to us.
Right, and that's our input into that is very specific, into an agreement with a laboratory that is accredited and approved by the minister. So therefore, it cannot be done by a second party. It has to be done by the laboratory, and all the accrediting bodies, they list their accredited accredited labs, so you can always be cross-checking and so on. And that's why it is it's at a laboratory and not an agency or anything like that. So that was considered when, that was, taken into account when this part of the act was being, it was very specific. And we also, I think, said which accrediting bodies, I think that is listed somewhere else, and that was purposely done. Oh, okay, in the first schedule, those particular bodies.
But at this point in time, you will not have identified such.
No, that has
so
not.
Then, Chair, through you, can I ask the forensics to at least submit a list of labs that would have met the accreditation that you may be able to utilize once the volume of samples come in? Because I wouldn't like a situation where the volume of samples start to come in for analysis and then we start to go and look for these accredited institutions, if it is you're saying that this is what would be required to help you in terms of your more efficient analysis.
But,
sorry.
I just say, Senator, in the first schedule, as it relates to Section 6 of the Act, there actually are 4 named internationally recognized accredited bodies: the American Society of Crime and Laboratory Directors Laboratory Accreditation Board, the Forensic Quality Services International FQS 1, the Standards Council of Canada, and the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. And I seem to recall, because I had something to do with the passage of this legislation, it recognized that at the initial stages of our going DNA, if I could put it colloquially, we would not have had an accredited laboratory ourselves. And that provision was designed to allow us an opportunity to use their accredited facility until we built up sufficient practice and so on and became accredited ourselves. Wasn't that it, Madam Director?
Well, probably in the initial legislation, but in this particular legislation, this was done because and I know it was being done by the TTPS at a particular point in time, but this was really to take into account, because when we had discussions, unless we set up a separate entity, the center will not be in a position for the volume, especially in the initial phases. So that was some discussions that were held where we would, in fact, enter into agreements with foreign labs, particularly to do the what we call the reference samples.
Just for my own clarification, you answered, the question was asked whether or not the TTFCS currently engages, outsources, and the answer is no. Maybe, but we know for a fact that in recent times, in a number of high-profile cases, DNA samples were sent abroad, maybe by the TTPS. So I don't know, maybe the Commissioner of Police perhaps could indicate to us how many samples per year, are sent abroad for analysis. Since the TT Forensic Sciences Complex doesn't do it, the police surely do.
I don't have exact numbers, but I can confirm, yes, there are specific cases in which the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service would have sourced analysis external, and those it's extremely expensive, and in those circumstances there are only few cases you can so do, but I don't have exact numbers, and I can verify how many in well, I'm sure none in 2016 because I have to sign off. But I am aware that there are cases and there would have been in previous years.
Plus, the reason why, is it that is there a specific skill set that is lacking in the forensic sciences complex? The reason why you would have sent these samples abroad?
Well, I'll ask ESP Dillion to explain that. He will give the specific terminologies in relation to what is viewed from the Homicide Bureau, because those are generally homicide cases. So we don't send routine cases. They are generally homicide cases.
Mr. Chairman, Honorable Chairman, what normally transpires at the Homicide Bureau is that in terms of certain items that are required for DNA processing, checks would have been made at the Forensic Science Center in terms of whether these items can be actually processed for DNA at the Forensic Science Center. Once that information is obtained, that the center is unable to provide those processing and analyzing and testing of those items, then the items are sent abroad for testing.
Well, for me, there seems to be a serious issue in my mind, because if those samples are sent abroad and they are returned, and we know that there's no custodian, who exactly is the custodian of those records when they return those profiles?
The profiles are returned. They are along with the reports to the investigator. Also, they are stored at the laboratory in the United Kingdom that does the testing.
Senior counsel, is there any problems you foresee in prosecuting these matters, given in light of the legislation going forward with the current VI approach to storing profiles?
Well, with some reservation, I would say no, because basically the results would be evidence, and you can always call the expert who would have done the analysis to come and give evidence with respect to the DNA results. So I don't think the evidence could be dismissed.
Building the database, the findings of the outsourced company should be included into the database, into the local forensics. So I'm asking, could the information now be shared if that's possible, because that information is vital?
Actually, yes, that is the purpose of the data bank, is that all DNA taken and even analyzed by anyone pertaining to Trinidad and Tobago will be sent. For instance, if we have a deportee, for instance, a deportee who is returned to Trinidad and Tobago and his DNA profile is included with his records, that will not be sent to the Forensic Science Center, because we are only going to keep records of profiles that we have generated, and that is where the data bank, that is where it will be stored. Similarly, anything that the police has, that will be stored, because what the data bank will do, which is, everybody will keep, labs will always keep the information on profiles that they have created, because we will always have to go to court sometimes 5-10 years down the road. So we will always have to keep it. We keep results and records of all the cases we've worked on, regardless of whatever type of case. So we will have to keep it, right? And similarly, labs abroad will have to keep it. But once the data bank comes in, that will then have to go to the data bank. They will have their different categories of databases, whether it's a crime scene and so on. So that is the purpose, to collect all and have it in one central place for anybody who wants information. So that is understood.
I am keeping my eye on the clock. 6 o'clock is approaching. I haven't broken a sweat as yet, and this interface is, in my view, very, very useful for the advancement of the concern to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So it is, to my mind, very, very worthwhile and very useful. Two things come to mind as I throw my eye on the clock, aiming to finish at 6 o'clock. If we apply the provisions of this law, we would make, obviously, a major dent in the wanton criminality that takes place in Trinidad and Tobago. For example, I don't know if the commissioner might agree with this. A thought just came. It may very well be possible that persons of criminal bent will try to infiltrate organizations like ours. Well, like the police service from whence I came, and the defense force, and the customs, and all the units identified here. Is the commissioner prepared to agree with that general comment that criminal elements will try to infiltrate, try to get some of their people into our ranks?
I will fully agree with you, and that will be something which the country will face on a continuous basis. Yes. It's a global issue, regardless of where you are. Criminal elements will seek to infiltrate lawful agencies.
But if they knew when they apply, as the law says, an applicant for the job, that you'll take a little bit of hair, you'll take a little bit of blood, you'll take a buccal swab, and it will be matched against some crime scene sample that would have been gathered 10 years ago that they know, although we don't, that they were involved in, they are less likely to approach. Would you gentlemen and ladies agree with that? Yes.
I again would agree with you. But at the end of the day, the act doesn't stand on its own, and I want to share that with the chairman and the committee.
Yes.
It's critical for the effective operation of this act that regulations are generated, and I haven't heard anything about the regulations to effectively operationalize this act. So while we speak about the act existing, it will not stand on its own. There must be regulations to support the act.
I agree with that, but I must respond to say two things on that matter. One, there are provisions of this act that are not being complied with that don't require any regulations. That is one. And two, if we are not applying the act, you see, because the Bible says, ask and it shall be given unto you. If we are not applying the act, we would have encountered no deficiencies and difficulties. And therefore the urge, the call, the natural inclination towards refinement in regulations would have come axiomatically. I have a suspicion that there was no call because hardly anything was done. That's my response. I say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So, Mr. McIntyre, obviously, the Act provides, and the section says, and I read it, that the minister may make regulations. Not shall, you know, he may. But that would come to the extent that that refinement is necessary. Where, in the dishonored checks bill, the police encountered difficulties, they said so. It was reported to the minister. He reported it to the Attorney General. The Attorney General took it to the Legislative Review Committee. Mr. McIntyre and company made the necessary amendments, came back to Parliament. It became law. The loophole was blocked. In similar manner, if there was a call, but to this date, we haven't even stumbled off the blocks to get a custodian or a DNA bank started. And therefore, if you have no bank, what do you regulate? So that's just my off-the-cuff response, although I'm told by the senior lawyers a lawyer never gives an off-the-cuff response, but that's my off-the-cuff response. So, 6 o'clock is 4 minutes away. And I would like you, as a matter of this committee's usual extension of courtesies, I would like to invite you to say any closing words that you may wish to, beginning, of course, with the director of the Forensic Science Center and going along the front desk, Madam Lewis.
Madam Chair, sorry, Chairman, Honorable, sorry, yeah, sorry. It's 6 o'clock. Honorable Chair, I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity. I will provide the information required by Honorable Member, Ms. Oliveri, in terms of wanting to know the actual output for each of the years, because the way the question was framed, I didn't understand that, and the other bits and pieces of information I will share with the PS so that, and the other stakeholders who are here, so that we can have the act, really effectively being in place and work with what we have as best as we could. Thank you, sir.
Honorable Chair, it's a pleasure, a privilege to be part of the hearing today. Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to indicate that regulations have been drafted since 2015. However, we were taking instructions from the Ministry of Justice at the time. And now that the portfolio has moved to the Ministry of National Security, we hope that those regulations will be finalized. I will let Permanent Secretary Mr. Yearwood speak more to the proposal in terms of the timeline for the regulations as well. And as you have already indicated and requested that the timelines be provided. So the regulations will be factored into those timelines. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Honorable Minister, I just want to correct piece of information in relation to silence. Just to share with you that the Commissioner of Police present and the Commissioner of Police before have publicly indicated the importance of DNA testing in Trinidad and Tobago, has made public utterances and requests for the operationalization of the legislation with the critical requirements for the appointment of a custodian and deputy custodian. Representation have been made because this is not today that we are working towards getting effective legislation in place. Out of recommendations, we have had legislation change, and you would have seen a journey by way of legislation prior to 2012, 2014, representations have been made. So I just want to put on record that I have not stayed silent. I've been publicly speaking on this matter, and people prior to me sitting in the office have done the same. Yeah, so thanks.
Chairman, this is a very important exercise, and I want to give you and the public the assurance that it will be pursued vigorously by the Ministry of National Security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like PSA Wood and the other members of the front table here, I want to thank you and the members of the committee for assisting us at the ministry in pushing this I could call it a project forward. Since the last time we've met, we've done a number of things. We've liaised with the CPO and gotten the terms and conditions for employment for the custodian, which we are going to work on as early as from tomorrow to get those persons in place. And certainly we have actually already drafted put together a draft timeline for the implementation of this project, which certainly we are going to share with you as you've requested. So I want to thank you and the members of the committee for certainly providing us with the kind of support and trigger to help push this project forward. And we are going to give you the assurance that we are going to stay on this and ensure that it is implemented in the shortest possible time. Thank you again.
Well, on behalf of the committee, all parliamentarians, I say, since you thank us so lusciously and so well, and we are not expected or permitted to ask for increases in salaries, which we are not doing, would you like to share some of your pay with us? That having been said, in the spirit of conviviality, let me thank you all as well for coming and for staying the extended time that you have stayed with us. We too consider this exercise uniquely important, and we give the commitment as a committee that we will continue to carry out our function, because we are all headed in the same direction, making this platform, Trinidad and Tobago, a more secure and safer and blessed place. Thank you all very much. Travel safely to your respective homes. I want to thank my secretariat for the tremendous support they give, and my colleagues. Thank members of the media and the staff of the Parliament generally for your support in this project. Thank you all very, very much, and I must advise you again, by extension of our courtesy and hospitality, we have prepared a room and some refreshments for your entertainment. God bless. We thank you.